of the things that are kind of unique to Utah. Many of you know that. I'm really hoping to change several of these facts. Okay, so just to start off, I think the main purpose of risk assessment is to put people in risk groups. Once we put people in risk groups, then we can make really good decisions about what to do with that group. And so I want to kind of show you here, this is a hard chart to kind of understand. But this is, we use in the prison, there are several different risk assessments that we use. The gold standard is the static 99 and the stable 2007. We're in the process right now in Utah of trying to train everybody that wants to, that is able to, over to use the static 99 and stable 2007. Then we can, all of our documents are going to look the same. And also, so these two tools have the most amount of research behind them. It's kind of controversial right now because some people are pretty happy with the risk tools that they're using, but I'm in the process of becoming a static 99 and stable 2007 trainer. I should have that done in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then I'll be able to train a lot of people in that. But so one of the main reasons why we would do risk assessments is to put people in risk groups. If you can see this here on the left side is your static 99 score, and this on your right side is your stable 2007 score. And as you can see that we can combine those two scores, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later because maybe this is moving a little bit too fast, but some risk is stuff that you can't really change, like whether or not you have a criminal history, and some risk is stuff you can change, like whether or not you're impulsive. If you're impulsive, you can work on it and hopefully become less impulsive. And so the stable 2007 focuses on these, that's why they call it stable, these items that you can change, but maybe are difficult. I have personally been trying to work on my impulsivity for years, and I've gotten slightly better. And so that I think you can get better on this. But as you can see, people with very low static scores and low stable scores are found in this level 1, very low risk. And people with very high static scores and very high stable scores are in this well above average risk range. So just to help you understand what these risk groups are and why we would even use them, is this is based after the medical model. And so so you can see this is level 1 through 4B. The medical model is level 1 through 5 is what it is. We don't have a 5 because 5 means virtually certain to reoffend. And there is no risk group that we have found that is virtually certain of reoffending. So we don't have that risk category that we do. So this is one area that differs from the medical model. So you can see we have level 1, which is very low risk, level 2, which is below average, level 3, which is average, level 4A, which is above average, and level 4B, which is well above average. So this is our highest risk group. And so I think if you went to the general public and you said, hey, this guy is in the highest risk group, he's in the well above average risk range, what would you guess his potential recidivism rate is? And I think your average public would say like 90%, 100%. And if you look, our highest risk group, if you find that we track them over a 5-year period, these are 5-year recidivism rate estimates. When you track this group over a 5-year period, they recidivated about 27%, which is still 1 in 4. We don't like that, but that's why we don't have a level 5, because 1 in 4 is still less than half. It's still on the lower things. So that's one thing that we learned when we started tracking people with sex offenses, is that the baseline of sexual offending is a lot lower than we expected. And as you can see, this very low risk range, we are seeing people recidivate at around 3%. And if you know what is the risk of your average person in the population, it's between 1% and 3%. So our lowest range is about on average of what a guy without a sex offense history would be kind of there. And so I don't know if any of this is making sense, but this is just kind of the general framework. So if you get a report from us and someone says, we assessed this guy, we put him in the level 3 average risk range, and then we start having these numbers. This is not stuff that we put together. This is the the statistics put together by the developers of the tool. And one thing that we know about this particular tool is there are tens of thousands of people that we've tracked over a 25-year period. We learned a lot of really cool things from tracking people over a long period of time. One is recidivism rates are lower than we expected. And then we also learned what things are important and what things are not important to address in treatment. And another thing is, one thing that's come out recently, because now we have like 20-year data, 25-year data, is if someone stays in the community for 20 years without committing a sex crime, there's virtually no evidence that they will commit sex crimes again, which is one of the reasons why we push for like risk-based registry and a couple of other things, which is a really hot topic in Utah. You actually might not see it come up for another year or two. Like we got beat up pretty badly about it in SOMAC. And so we're going to be a little bit more nervous to bring that up. But that's one of the reasons why we push for this particular reform, is because when we track these guys for long amounts of time, after you've been out of prison for a certain number of time without committing sex crimes, the likelihood of someone doing that is actually quite low. So if you look here, these are the average rearrest rates. So these are the range. There's been a bunch of different studies over the years, and these are like Canadian samples and English samples and American samples. And it seems like in general, sex offenders or people with sex offense histories are being rearrested for sex crimes between 10 and 17%, just on average. But you can see when we break this down into individual risk groups, that's why it's not very helpful to look at everyone as a whole, because this guy has a 3% recidivism rate, this guy has a 27% recidivism rate. And, that's not very helpful. We can't make really good policy decisions when we lump these guys all together and kind of make decisions about what it is. So that's kind of the rate that's kind of there. So I don't know. I'm just going to keep going. So I guess if one of you starts yelling at me and asking me questions, I'll stop and try to explain some stuff.
Jared, okay. Did you want to take questions or comments during your presentation, or do you want us to wait till after?
Well, I am nervous that I'm just going to talk about stuff that I love and is really exciting, and I'll either put everyone to sleep or no one will have any idea what I'm talking about. So if no one has any idea what I'm talking about, or they have a question, I guess I don't mind stopping and answering that if someone wants to kind of do that as a time, because it is kind of dense and I really like it and I think it's really interesting, but so how about we take questions after this slide, because this may answer a ton of stuff if anyone has it, and if anyone has any questions after it, yeah. I will pause and ask. Okay, so one of the confusing things about doing risk assessments is this. Risk assessments, the ones that we currently do, are based on what we call normed data or aggregate data. What that means is they create a risk group where they're not designed to identify risk for an individual. So every time you hear me say, this person has this risk rate, I'm wrong about it. What I can say instead is this person was identified as being in this risk group. And this risk group, if we track this group over time, tends to be arrested for new sex crimes at about this percentage. So the reason why that's really important is because I will be working with an individual and I'll say, hey, you're in the above average risk group. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm done. And I'm like, well, no, because 75% of people in that group do not commit new sex crimes, or at least are identified as committing new sex crimes. And I don't know, based on my risk assessment, whether you're one of those 25 or you're one of those 75. All I know is that you belong to this group, and I can make certain treatment decisions and program decisions and recommendations based on this risk group, but I actually don't know which one you are in here. And I think that's really helpful to kind of understand it. Some people misunderstand that and create a lot of different things based on that. So anyway, so we are making decisions based on the group, not based on the individual, which is confusing. And I don't know that everyone writes their discharge summaries like that, but if you ever read one of my discharge summaries, this is an example of what I would say. I would say Mr. Johnson was found to be in the average risk group. Others in his risk group were identified as being arrested for new sex crimes at a rate of 7.5%. That means if 100 individuals in his risk group were tracked over a 5-year period, we would expect about 8 of that group to be arrested for new sex crimes. Conversely, we would expect about 92 of that group to not be arrested for a sex crime in a 5-year period. So that's how I would try to describe it. If you're in the average risk range, it doesn't mean you have an 8% chance of reoffending. It means that if we had 100 guys in your group, we would expect about 8 of them to reoffend. And we don't know which one you are. But also, so that's why, even though this is really helpful information, at the same time, there's some real limits to it. And if you understand what it is that we're saying, it is helpful to say people in this group maybe need higher level of treatment than someone in a lower group. That might be helpful to say. But to say, if anyone ever says this person has an 8% chance of reoffending, then they don't understand the statistics. And so anyway, that's what I'm saying. We can predict group recidivism with moderate accuracy, but we can't tell if a person in front of us is going to be one of those 8 or one of the 92. So I don't know if that is super clear to all of you, or if you hate that. I don't know. Maybe it'll get more fun. Questions or no? We're just moving on. Molly, you're going to regret bringing me. Okay, so this is how so we told you between 17 and, between 10 and 17 is what we're looking at for the average national and international numbers. How does Utah compare to this? So Utah's numbers, we are having a hard time comparing it to national numbers, but I keep getting emails from people trying to compare them. So there's a couple of reasons why we can't compare them. One reason is these sample sizes are huge. Ours are not huge. Secondly, these are like 5-year and 10 years that we track people. Ours are like 3 years. So because of that, we can't compare apples to oranges on this one. But here's so this is a study that the U of U did, and it was published the same year UPAN was organized in 2013. And this is what the U of U kind of found tracking some of our guys. And this is over a 3-year period. They found that about 56% of the guys being released didn't come back for anything. And 40% came back for parole violations, and 2.7% came back for new sex crimes. So already, if the national average are between 10 and 17, these numbers look a lot better than that. These numbers will go up over time when we start adding the extra years into them. So we can't throw a party about these numbers being so low. But I'm going to show you 3 different types of statistics on this, and they all say similar things. So I don't want to get too excited about it, but our numbers are looking okay. And I don't know what it is. By the way, when I show this to parole officers, they go, well, that's because we have aggressive paroling and we send people to prison really quickly, and that's why we don't have sex offense rates. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what they believe. But I do know that we have pretty high parole. 40% of people coming back to prison for something. We've got to shrink those numbers. So I think some of our goals are we've got to be able to shrink our parole violations without increasing our new crimes. That's like my goal. If we could have like 4% coming back for parole violations and 1%, actually, let's go with 0% if we're just like wishing. But I love to reduce this parole violations without affecting. So when I talk to parole AP&P, they think that if we were able to be looser on parole, that we'd see those like new crimes go up. And so I'd really like to think that they're not right about that. So, but I'm not sure. Okay. So these are my numbers, and these are the worst numbers because I just tracked everybody over all times. And so this is the most non-scientific number. Every single person I've ever released from the San Pete County Jail, I tracked. And so we released, like nearly 300 people. And up to last year, when I crunched all these numbers of everyone that I've ever released from prison, 7 have come back on new sex crimes, so about 2.5%, which is about what the U of U study showed. And then I had 97 come back from parole violations, so 35%. So I don't love the 35% parole violations, but anyway, so that's kind of where we are. Now, those are just my own numbers, just because I wanted to track and make sure that we were doing really good work down in the San Pete County Jail. And I'm pretty proud of at least being lower than national averages and things like that. So,
Jared, this is Molly. Can I jump in? Because I think it does make a difference to know that I love that you're tracking, or you were tracking, successful completion of treatment, because people that drop out or people that just simply don't go, well, the people that simply don't go end up going back to jail or prison. But I just want to give you a shout out, because I think that's the other thing that the public and legislators and lawmakers need to know.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is my last recidivism slide. We've got a couple of years like this, but this is just so these are everybody released from the Utah Department of Corrections between 2021 in the year 2021, and we tracked them until 2024. So these are our most recent numbers, the 2021 cohort. And so how many came back for only parole violations? And so that's 216 at about 44.72. So that's about 45% for parole violations. That number is so high. That kills me every time I see this. People arrested for a new non-sex crime, that's 5.38%. Number of people arrested for new sex crimes, 7. So this cohort was about 1.5%. And so we tracked about 483 people that were released in that year. And so, like I said, I don't know what the relationship between parole violations and, but these are all people sort of released from the Department of Corrections in that 2021. And so I really don't like, because every one of these 7 represent new victims and new crimes and just does a bunch of damage to everyone's credibility and reputation. So I do want to pay attention to this. So that's why I say every time I start celebrating, I'm like, well, there are new victims here with this. So so I don't know what this data means, but we're tracking it. Expect these numbers to go up as we track these groups for longer periods of time. We're going to see these numbers go up. And so but it's still like, I just haven't seen a number coming out of Utah that is even close to the average risk range. And so anyway, so either we're doing something well or what it is. I guess you are free to interpret these numbers however you want, but we're going to be releasing, and one thing that's kind of exciting is we're going to be releasing quarterly risk assessment data to the Sex Offense Management Board, and they're going to be publishing a bunch of Utah-specific numbers. And so maybe we won't have a lot of good things to say for a couple of years, but eventually we're going to have some pretty big data sets that we can track and get really good ideas of how we're doing and what is going on. And so anyway, so I don't know if anyone has any questions about that before I jump in.
There were a couple questions in the chat. I think Jenny asked now I lost her. Are the types of parole violations being tracked, or just parole violations in general? Like,
oh no, we break them all down into what it is. And so I don't know if you guys are surprised by this. The top 3 biggest reasons people are coming back to prison, one is like sexual material, like pornography use or something like that is going to be in the top 3. Dating women with kids or having like unsupervised access to children is going to be another one. Drugs is going to be that top one. We have a smattering of other things, new crimes, absconding. We have, I was afraid that it was going to be more, but it's still on the list, but a little bit smaller is like failure for treatment completion. I was afraid that people are going to get out in the community and like not complete treatment and they get kicked back in. And we are seeing some of that, but not quite as much. So it's really drugs, sexual material, and dating women with children or having access to children without permission or supervision. So those are the top 3 that we tend to see. Yeah, I tracked all those very specifically at Sanpete County Jail, and we've been looking at those numbers and trying to put it in. So I don't know if that answers your question. Is there another question, Molly?
Above that, in the chat is there a reason for the parole violations being so high, and what can we do to help our loved ones not be part of that statistic? So would you recommend or agree with me that families need to know the parole stipulations and the registry rules for their loved ones that are on the SO registry?
Yeah, I think so. I think knowing that stuff, but I would be surprised if a whole bunch of guys come back not knowing.
Families. To support them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we were talking a lot about risk factors today, but one of the most exciting things about the sex offense research is new research is talking about protective factors. So people that have really supportive families come back to prison at lower rates. People that have good jobs come back to prison at lower rates. And so one of the problems about prison is if you look at risk factors and protective factors. We know that being around negative social influences increases recidivism rates. So then we separate people from their positive support. We put them in prison around negative support. So in a lot of ways, I'm not surprised that we see a lot of high percentage, because we effectively strip people of all their protective factors and then add them. If someone didn't have a lot of like negative emotionality before, or didn't have like a complex of feeling persecuted, putting someone in prison for a long time and subjecting them to all this stuff like kind of like asks for them to develop some of those things. And so prison does not make people better, and long-term prison really struggles with some of that stuff. And so I think the last thing I want to say maybe is, when I was running a private practice, I was really surprised by this. It almost felt like I had like a 3 to 6 month mark where all of my guys were going back for parole violations. And there's something about like you leave prison, and I call it kind of freedom drunk. You're like, you're crying over donuts and like, all this like freedom that you never had before. You're like turning lights on and off. It's really exciting. But after a while, you're just working really hard and you're really stressed out and everyone's against you. And you can only just kind of push against things for so long. And I kind of noticed that my clients, about the 6 month mark, if they didn't have positive things in their life and they weren't developing like healthy habits and things that are going on, eventually you just kind of like lose the will to kind of push forward. And then all of a sudden, your brain's telling you, well, just do something to feel better. Just do something to feel better. And so I've noticed that it happens, but rarely do I have guys that are committing parole violations within the first month or two. But around the 6 month mark, lots of guys were. Because at that point in time, I had several of my clients on parole tell me, I'm just going to get out of prison and I'm just going to work super hard until I get off parole. And I'm like, you're never going to make it, because you can't go to work for 16 hours, come home, sleep, wake up, and do that for like 6 months. Eventually you start thinking, what's the point? And I had one client tell me after being out for 6 months that he had never been more depressed in his entire life. And he went into prison for 15 years. And so, but the like 6 months after coming out was the like deepest depression he got into, because he didn't have what, like you guys are saying, he didn't have the family support. Nothing positive was happening. He always had, people were always suspicious of him. And I just don't think you can live like that for a long time. So I do think people with positive family have a huge leg up, and people that don't, I don't know. I don't know if I saw Andrew raising his hand. I don't know if you had thoughts about it.
My question was just the statistics for violations. Is that all violations, or is that just violations that end up with the person incarcerated again? Does that include alternative events?
Yeah, so this includes anytime someone went back into custody for any length of time. So if it's even a 72-hour hold. So these are big differences, because we have some guys going, that's why maybe the numbers are really, really high, because that counts people that went in for an overnight and then were released, but it also counts people that went back in for like 2 years. And so, but someone going back in for 2 years is a much bigger deal than someone going in for 72 hours. But we count all of those for like, we have some data. I just gave you like kind of the abbreviated data. We do have some data that breaks it down into like what we call minor technical violations versus like things that we consider more serious. And some of our data will say like we'll have a term that we call concerning technical. Like if someone is coming back to prison on sexual materials charge, but they were like, it looked like they were looking for younger people for pornography or something like that, we would put that on the concerning part, because there is a big difference between looking at adult normative pornography and searching for like barely legal stuff or whatever that's kind of trying to happen. So we would put one of those in a concerning violation versus the other one. And my personal statistics that I didn't share on this one, but they went through all of these different areas and they broke it down. Over one of our statistics showed that I had the lowest number of new sex crime rates, but I had a pretty high concerning violation. And so I had to ask myself, like, I don't know, maybe that was just a fluke, but more of my previous clients than I wanted to were coming back for something that made people really uncomfortable. So, yeah. Okay. Moving on then. All right. I don't know what happened. I'm trying to move on and it is not letting me. There we go. Okay, so I already talked about this. So here's the only other issue, the second part here. These are only rates of detected sex crimes. And this is the rub when I'm meeting with victim advocate groups. Victim advocates say, okay, so now you have really good rates of guys that were being arrested for new sex crimes. But what about the guys that go out and commit new sex crimes and don't get caught? And when I'm meeting with victim advocacy groups, I think they believe those rates are really, really big because they are unknown. We don't know what those rates are. I guess it is possible that we have like between 2 and 4% of our guys are coming back on new sex crimes, but maybe every one of them is going out and committing a new sex offense. I don't know that. I'd like to think that's not true. Although there is some recent research there's only one article about this, so I don't want to get too excited about it, but there is some recent research that indicates that once someone has been identified as committing a sex crime, the likelihood of them being identified again is much higher. So once you committed one sex crime, everyone in your life knows what to look for, and you have AP&P, and you have a therapist, and it's much harder to get away with a sex crime once you've been identified as someone with a history of sex crimes. And so there is some research that the actual rate between identified or detected sex crimes and actual sex crimes, we don't know what those differences, but the numbers are closer than maybe we are worried that they are. I'd like to think so. But anyway, but this is a big thing. And this is one of the reasons why we have a hard time pushing for reforms with the legislature, because they really worry that this number is really big and that guys are just, and one of the things that they worry about is guys go to prison and they learn how to not get caught. And then they come out and they're really good at not getting caught. And that's why they're like, well, we can't take a risk on this. Even if your risk assessment says they're low risk, we don't trust that. And so that's one of my big challenges, which is really hard when I think, that's why one of the things I wanted to ask when we get to UPAN, and I think we need to all work together on this stuff. Like I do have groups that will be writing letters to the board of pardon saying, the prison therapists have no idea what they're doing with risk. And sometimes what you're doing is undermining yourselves when you do that, because if they don't believe our risk, what are they going to believe? They're going to believe the opposite, which is that everyone is risky. And so I think we have to be really careful that we don't try to undermine the science, even if it's kind of an easy way to sort of do it, because I don't think if the board of pardons stops trusting me, they're not going to just release everyone with a sex crime. That's not what's going to happen. So I think we're actually harming ourselves if we undermine some of that stuff. Okay. So let's see what's going on. So one of the weird things when I started looking at risk factors, because the idea is once you identify a risk area, then you can address it and then you can treat it. So some areas are things like using sex as a coping strategy. People that use sex as a coping strategy come back to prison at a higher rate. Or people that have poor problem solving skills, or people that have, negative social groups. So once we learn about that, then we can actually do treatment that is targeted and effective, and I think really exciting. But there's a lot of counterintuitive stuff in risk assessment. Like one of the counterintuitive things is risk assessment is all about number of arrests rather than number of victims. And I think one of the easy way to look at it is it's numbers of DUIs. The number of times you drove drunk doesn't necessarily equal risk, but the number of times you've been caught and then chose to drink again really suggests risk. So there's something about getting caught, going to court, having all of those issues. Most people, when you get caught and have problems, change your lives. And the majority of my clients, one of the things I love about doing therapy in prison is the majority of my clients have been working on themselves for years. And by the time they get to me, they've made a ton of changes. And I feel like I'm more the cherry on top rather than sometimes I really am come on, man, it's been 10 years. You really have to make some changes. But most of the guys I work with are making a lot of changes. And so if you go through that whole process and then go out and commit a new sex crime, that's indicative that something's really wrong because you had a lot of opportunities to change and you didn't. And so that's a counterintuitive thing that I didn't know. So for instance, if you have a guy who molested 3 or 4 girls and went to prison once, and then you have another guy that molested 1 girl, went to prison, and then committed a new sex crime, the one that has 2 victims might be way more risky than the guy that has 8 victims. And that's one thing that's really hard for the board of pardons to understand. Lately, we've had I've had 3 cases in the last month where we've wrote discharge summaries for guys that have been found in the low risk, and we sent them to the Board of Pardons, and the Board of Pardons read their history and said, there's no way this guy's low risk. We're going to put him in prison for an extra 5 years. It's happened 3 times in the last month. And every time I talk to them, they say, well, when I looked at the crime, it looked really bad. And there were lots of victims in this, and it was happening over a long period of time. And that's why some of this risk stuff is counterintuitive, because I think that makes a lot of sense. This guy had a number of victims. The sex crimes were pretty intense. And then the Board of Pardons is saying, we just aren't going to release this guy, even though my risk assessment is saying this is in the lowest possible risk range that we have. And so I have kind of an uphill battle to try to convince some of these groups that the research applies and that kind of works. And I think people that can kind of understand this stuff. The second example of maybe a counterintuitive risk thing is non-contact offenses actually equal higher risk. If you have a contact offense, you're actually statistically in the lower risk range than someone with a non-contact offense. And a lot of people are like, that doesn't make any sense, because the contact offenses are maybe worse and more destructive and having a lot of problems, but then I think the reason why is sometimes the non-contact offenses, you can justify easier, and sometimes you can get to that place a little bit easier, and you can tell yourself, I wasn't actually hurting anybody. So it's, for whatever reason, people are more willing to go back to the non-contact risks or offenses than the contact offenses. So that's a counterintuitive thing that I didn't know about before I got trained and assessed in risks. And so that's why I'll have people that say, well, this just isn't right. And it does take a lot of research to be able to figure some of this out. So if you understand risk, there really are 2 main areas that we're trying to identify. We're trying to find out how much offense-oriented sexual interest or deviant sexual interest someone has and how many antisocial traits they have. And so the person with the most deviant sexual interest and the most antisocial traits is going to end up being in that higher risk bracket. And so one of the reasons why some guys are in the lowest risk range is because they don't have a lot of antisocial traits. So if you don't have a big criminal history, it's, you're not as antisocial and things like that. So the biggest issue here, this point number 4, this is my biggest challenge right now. There's a big difference between risk and justice, and there's a big difference between egregiousness of crime and risk. These are all different. And a lot of times I've talked to 2 family members of guys that have gotten kind of big rehearings from the Board of Pardons. And they were like, well, why won't the board look at your risk assessment? And I was like, well, the board looks at a lot of stuff. The Board of Pardons looks at a lot of stuff, and risk is one of them. And I'm trying to convince them that risk is very important, maybe the most important thing to look at. But sometimes they look at justice and they think, well, a lot of victims' families came out and we don't think justice has been served. Even though you're telling me this guy is low risk, we're going to put him in because of justice. Or they look at the example I gave you, okay, you say he's low risk, but his crime was pretty egregious and we don't like that. And we're not going to release him. And so those are my biggest challenges when I talk to people about it, because the sex offense treatment program has nothing to do with justice. All we do is identify risk and reduce risk. And I think that we have to, so because of that, there is a lot of complications when we're working with the Board of Pardons or other members that do look at justice and other things like that. So, okay, purpose of risk assessment. They aid in a lot of our decision making. They help us track progress over time. I think it's really great that we are able to show to people that someone has gotten better in treatment. That's why one of the reasons we really like dynamic risk factors. We can really show that they were in treatment and over time they got better. We have these targets. We can assess it. We can know all of these different things. And so I think that's really a great way. So as in the prison system, we will do a structured risk assessment at the beginning of treatment, at the end of treatment. And then we try to be able to highlight any areas of reduced risk during treatment. One of the problems is it is really hard to demonstrate reductions of risk while you're in prison, because it's a pretty sterile environment. It's a pretty controlled environment. And so we have so many discussions among our therapists in the prison about, well, how does this guy actually prove to me that he got better? He doesn't have any access to anything to be able to show that he was able to do it. And so anyway, so that's hard. So it is easier to show that you've reduced risk once you get on parole than it is in prison. And I like to be able to, we're writing recommendations right now for parole agents, because every now and then, if you look, because people with sex offense histories, it's a very heterogeneous group. And sometimes agents and other people, they look at everyone with a sex crime as if they've molested children, and they look at everyone as if they're risky. And I think it's our job to be able to say, okay, if you get this guy, we need, I recommend you supervising him in this way, and here's the things I want you to kind of work with him on. And so those are kind of the reasons why we do that. There's been a lot of research about the difference between risk assessment and gut feeling. There's been a lot of research where they took people with years of history of assessing guys, and they just had them do just kind of an interview with them and then kind of write their gut feeling down, whether I think this guy is risky or not. And it turns out that nobody is good at this without a risk assessment. People think they are, and they're not. And so that's really why we are encouraging everyone in the sex offense treatment program to use a structured risk assessment. And I get all the time, and maybe I even, believe this, but I'll have family members call me up and they say, please, I just know he won't do it again. And maybe you're right. I mean, especially because the majority of people don't do it again. So you probably are right. But we have a really hard time writing letters to the Board of Pardons saying, I just really like this guy and he promised me he wouldn't. So instead, what we're trying to do is write, like, when we looked at the things that are predictive of sexual reoffending, this is what we found, and this is what we did in treatment to be able to reduce that. That's why that's our MO, what we're trying to do. So, okay. So these are the types of decisions based on risk that we're trying to do. Sometimes people make incarceration recommendations based on risk. We certainly make treatment decisions based on risk. Right now, our lower risk individuals are going through like a 3-month treatment program, and our higher risk guys, the highest risk group, is going through like a year to 18-month treatment program. And usually that's based on risk. If I do a dynamic risk assessment and the person just doesn't really have a lot of risk, like, what are we doing in treatment anyway? I don't know. If I went into your room and there really wasn't that many things that are messy. Sometimes I walk into a room and the room's a disaster and there's like stuff all over the floor. Like, how long is that going to take me to clean that room up? But sometimes I walk into a room and there's not very much askew and it can take me like 10 to 15 minutes. And people can be like that with risk. I'll do a risk and there isn't a lot for us to work on. So we just do targeted brief assessment or risk with them. We used to, last year, we were actually recommending all of our lower risk guys be treated in the community, and the Board of Pardons was having a really hard time with that decision. And they told me that they were not going to release anybody without treatment. And so because of that, we are providing brief and targeted treatment for lower risk guys. Because what we noticed was, if we would write like, hey, this guy's in the lowest risk group, we think that it would be a little bit better for him to do treatment outside of prison. And then what would happen is the Board of Pardons would just give him a 3-year rehearing and basically tell us to start over and do treatment with him. And so that was like really hard for us to kind of watch guys like kind of not, I mean, we were playing like chicken with these other groups. And at the, and these other guys were getting like hurt in the meantime. So we just decided, I decided when I came on board that I was going to do, we were going to do treatment for these guys. And so, and I got criticized recently. They were like, well, there's some research that says these guys don't even need treatment. They could just get released without treatment. And I'm like, yeah, we tried that. But currently, according to my opinion, the quickest way we can get someone out of treatment or out of prison is to provide them brief structured treatment, and then write the recommendations to the Board of Pardons. And then the Board of Pardons is going to be much more likely to release them. And part of it, I think, and I don't want to talk for the Board of Pardons, but part of it, I think, is liability. We had 3 really big cases where guys got out and committed new sex crimes. And 3 weeks ago, I just got interviewed by KSL News. It hasn't come out again, but maybe it will, and you'll see me in the news again. And, about these 3 guys that got released. And in one case, the board kind of released them a little bit early, and they went out and committed a new sex crime, and now there's lawsuits against them. So I think the board has to be really careful that as soon as they make a decision, So they do what they're doing. But any questions about that, I think you need to ask the board of pardons because I don't want to talk for them. So there is a really interesting study about paroling authorities. These are board of pardons. This is like not just Utah's, but everyone. And they did interviews of all the board of pardons members in all of the different states and countries, and they asked them, what are the different things you look at when you make a decision to release somebody? And this is the list that they came up with. And risk assessment was the highest on all of the list. I would guess if we're in Utah that risk assessment is like maybe third. I want to kind of get it up to number one, but there's other things, right? Like victim input, attitude and remorse. I talked to a board of pardons member recently, and he said that like behavior in prison, they look at it really seriously, and people that have negative behaviors, they just have a hard time releasing them. And that's what that is, institutional misconduct. So that's like kind of third on the thing. This is generally what paroling authorities are looking for. And I'm trying to do more education so that the board can trust us a little bit more on that. And so I think they do. I think they do read our risk assessments, and I think they do take it into consideration. But I would, certainly I believe it more than I think other people believe it. I've been using it for a long time. So, okay, any questions about any of this stuff before I move on? Am I just like screaming through any of this type of stuff? Okay.
There have been some questions in the chat, but maybe we'll just have to scroll through them later after.
Okay.
Some of them are very specific and some of them are more generalized.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't have the chat up, so I'm waiting. I'm
Okay.
I'm like expecting you to just stop me, Molly.
Oh,
Just
okay.
yell at me when they come up and we'll sort of address it. I am not ignoring.
Maybe one that could be clarified because I answered it in the chat based on my understanding, but the question was, when are these risk assessments done? And I'm assuming that means in the prison. So before, during, and after treatment?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing them all over the place. So they're getting done at pre-sentencing, even most
Right.
of the PSIs. And so like I said before, one of the challenges we have is the PSI team is currently using the VASER 2 and the SOTIPs, which are very similar to the Static 99, but they are different. So because of that, it's not super helpful to have a different instrument that we have a hard time comparing. So that's why we're going to retrain at least UDC to using the static stable. But so those risk assessments will happen then, and that will go into like decision making for sentencing. As soon as someone gets into therapy, the very first thing a therapist should do is a risk assessment. I mean, I don't know how you do treatment on somebody if you don't know what it is that you're addressing or the different problem areas. That should be the very first thing that you do. So either if someone gets put on probation, they will get a structured risk assessment as soon as they get with a professional. When you get into the prison, because the Static 99 can be done on historical factors, we actually have people do it just by, behind the scenes. We actually don't interview for that, but every single person will have a Static 99 within the first 30 days of coming into prison. I have a whole database of everybody's Static 99 scores. And then that helps me prioritize when, where to put them when they're ready and what groups we're going to kind of put them in. And then once we assign someone to a group, then the first thing that their therapist does is a structured risk assessment to sort of verify that score. But the Static 99 score should never change. If it's done at pre-treatment, it should be the same. And that's one of the problems with static risk is you can't fix it. So static risk is have you ever been arrested for a new sex or a sex crime previously? You can do therapy for 20 years and you still have that. Do you have, a violent arrest? No matter what you do in therapy, you still have that violent arrest. So that's what happens sometimes where you'll have a guy that maybe is scoring kind of high on that static score. He does a lot of therapy and we think he's in a much better place, but his risk score doesn't sort of support it. And so that could be a pretty frustrating thing for a lot of people because they're like, well, why am I always saddled with this high risk score? And that's why we actually do have, there's new, like I said before, there's new evidence that the longer you're out of prison, the lower your risk goes. And we can make an estimation using the risk estimation calculator. And so a lot of our risk assessments, a lot of our discharge summaries will say, hey, this guy is it like a 15, he's in that risk group that recidivates at around 15%. If he was in the community for 10 years, then his risk score would be down to like 4%. And we can make estimations about someone's risk over time, because we know risk goes down over time, even though I can't rescore the static. If I rescore the static, it'll give me the same score every time I do it. Unless I do. If someone rescored your static and you got a different number, two things happen. Either they're wrong or you committed a new sex crime. Those are kind of like the only ways your static can get better. Even if you get scored when you're young and then you get older, I still don't go back and rescore it. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. If it doesn't, then I'm sorry. Any other questions that would be good right now before we move on? Okay. All right, Molly, you're letting me go. Okay, so I could spend literally a day on this, and so I don't want to like bore everybody. I find this exceptionally fascinating, but these are the areas that are predictive of reoffending. And one thing that's really interesting is we have changed our entire approach to treatment as all of this research has come out. It used to be that things that we thought were really predictive of reoffending just are less predictive than we thought. So for instance, we used to, if any of you that did sex offense treatment like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we were all convinced that like not being open with your crime like made you really risky. And the research says it's not as predictive as we thought. So we used to spend like 3 months in treatment just trying to get people to be open with their crime. And we found that it's not really like time well spent. And so, but these are the areas that if any of your loved ones go into therapy, these should be the areas that we're going to be addressing. And not everyone, connects to everyone, but some of it is like feeling like everyone's against you, or like kind of generally feeling negative emotionality, having a high sex drive, sex as coping, sexual interest in children or violence or some kind of illegal activity, problems with rules or supervision, anger towards women, negative social group, impulsivity, problem with negative or not having problem solving skills. But these are the ones that we can't change, like age. You can change it, but that's a pretty bad intervention. If you're like, man, you're 18 now and you'll be less risky at 60, so we'll just keep you here. That's a really bad way of doing that. But that age does predict, younger guys come back to prison at higher rates than older guys. It's just is what we found. And in fact, such a high predictor that the difference between the static 99 and the static 99 revised is they revised the age. They found that younger guys were recidivating at rates higher than we expected, and older guys were committing new sex crimes at much, much lower rates. So the only way to get a -3 on the static 99 is if you have no other risk factors and you're older than 60. And so that's so anyone that if you are in the lowest risk range, it's because you're older. That's the only way to be in it. Because other than that, you'd be a 0, which is in the below average range, which is fine, which is good. Below average range is nice. But if you want to be in the like well below average range, the only way to do that is to be older. So then a history of violence, of criminal behavior, and also the ability to have a long-term relationship. I mean, this is some of the comments that people had earlier. Like, if you struggle to have long-term relationships, it might be a sign that there's some narcissism or psychopathy kind of happening in that. But also an ability to have a long-term relationship suggests a protective factor. And so this is why guys that have been married for an extended period of time and have their own children just score in lower risk rates on our risk factors, because some of these things are kind of happening. So I'm going to skip past this because this is way too much information. But just so you know, generally, these are the areas we're targeting in treatment. If someone is spending a lot of time talking about things in treatment, it should be these areas. And this is what the majority of our risk assessments are saying and doing. And our program should be focused on addressing these things. So these are areas that we used to think were sort of predictive, but are less predictive than we sort of thought. And Molly and I disagree a little bit on this, so I changed it because I know Molly was going to be here. It's not that empathy is important, it's that we found that empathy training isn't as helpful as we thought it was. Because like Molly would say that empathy is important, and I agree with her 100%. The ways we would train empathy in the past were not connected to recidivism. And so we had to change our programs, because it used to be that we would do things that just weren't working as well. But empathy is incredibly important, and it is a protective factor. people that have empathy commit fewer sex crimes. The question is, can I train empathy? And the research is suggesting that we're not as good at training empathy as we thought, although empathy is very important. So we used to think self-esteem was super important, and it is, but spending a lot of time in therapy hasn't really isn't the pay dirt that we thought. Mental health is certainly really important for people, but it is a secondary focus, because if you address someone's mental health, so let's say you address someone's depression, you start with a depressed guy with high risk, and then you end with a non-depressed guy with high risk. And so I think that like addressing the mental health doesn't necessarily address the risk areas. So sometimes you have to do both, but also the history of trauma is the same thing. Like these are all, when I do trainings like this, like lots of therapists push back on me, but there's been a lot of data that shows that when we spend a lot of time in treatment on these things, we don't affect risk in the same way than when we spend on these things. If we spend a lot of time in treatment on these things, we affect risk, and these ones we don't affect risk as much. So that's why you've noticed, any of you that have been in, seen therapy a while ago, it was a lot of this stuff, and now we do less of it. So, okay.
Can I jump in? There's a couple questions.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, now I have to find them. They were talking about, okay, we did I'm sorry, I should have been more prepared. You ended faster than I thought. So I think where did they go? Somebody speak up. Oh, denial of crime. So for the people that are denying crimes, but they either got convicted because they went to trial, or they ran out of money and they just plea bargained. And I know that's a small percentage. They think that 6% of inmates are innocent. How is SOTP addressing that these days? Because in the past they couldn't get in, but it's my understanding that you still can get in. And so she's asking about denial of crime.
So for sure. So denial of crime was a really, really big deal for a long time. And you're right. We could not get someone in treatment without a denial, with a denial. And, frankly, it was really hard to be a therapist during that time too, because you were like mostly just coaxing people to like give lots of explicit details about sexual offending. And I don't know that it made like anybody feel good. People would leave treatment and they just wouldn't and we found out that like addressing denial of crime didn't really reduce the recidivism rate. So we kind of stopped doing it. So one of the things is in our current programs in the prison, we spend very little time talking about the sex offense. And the reason for that is the majority of the things connected to sexual offending are these things over here. Like you can talk to someone about whether or not they hold grudges against somebody and not talk about like details of the sex offense. You can talk to people about positive ways they cope with stress. If you talk to people about managing their resentment and positive ways of coping with stress, you are doing sex offense treatment, even if you're not talking about, so that's the conversation I tend to have with someone. Someone will be like, hey, I'll do your stupid program, but I'm innocent, which by the way, everybody tells me, or at least like the majority of the people tell me. So many people tell me they're innocent. And so I'll be like, okay, whatever. Like you're here. I'm not a judge. I'm not a lawyer. My job is to identify your risk and kind of do treatment. But I make a deal with a lot of the guys that come into the program. Like we're going to look at these areas and it's likely, so I have some of these areas. If I was forced to go into therapy, I might actually get a lot out of it. I would get a lot out of impulsivity. I would get a lot out of negative emotionality. I was playing pickleball the other day and I don't know what happened. I lost my temper and I ran my mouth and I left and I was like, what's my problem? I need to go to therapy and I need to learn how to be a better loser, right? Because I was a poor loser and that's connected to negative emotionality. I could go to treatment, and if I was forced to do sex offense treatment today, I could work on these two areas. And I could do it. And I could, so I tell people like the worst thing you could do is go in and just make both our lives hard. Don't come in and just make our lives hard. Like I reserve the right to enjoy my life as much as everyone else reserves the right to enjoy my life. So don't make me drag you through this kicking and screaming. Like, and so because of that, we've adjusted. Now, unfortunately, we just started a program called Road to Freedom, and it feels like we took a step backwards a little bit. And it does have a lot of this like kind of rapey, like kind of things that were there. So I don't know how long we're going to stay with that program, but I don't know. We make deals with guys all the time. We don't require people to admit guilt to get into the program, but we do require people to be open-minded and use the group and participate. And I don't know that that's too much to ask, because I think if I was forced to do it, I think I could get stuff out of it. In fact, like I regularly practice skills that I don't know that I would have if I wasn't regularly practicing them in group. And so I don't know. I don't think I'm a therapist because I have better skills than everyone else. I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of do that. So, okay, I think I belabored that point. Molly, is there other questions? Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. What about those that have been in for a few years waiting to get into SOTP and haven't been assessed? Because, 10 years ago, they weren't assessing people when they walked in the door. How are you handling that?
Everybody's assessed. Yeah, we don't have anybody in the prison system right now that doesn't have a static 99.
Okay. What about the stable?
Yeah, they get the stables as soon as they start treatment. The stable interview is like an hour and a half. It takes a really long time to do. And it's like probably it's just bad like resource management if we just go out and do stables on everyone. And plus, a stable is supposed to be like a snapshot in history. So it really doesn't matter risk-wise how much, how risky someone was 10 years ago. Right? Sometimes I'll read someone's PSI and I was like, this guy was a piece of work. Like this guy must have been really hard to be around. And then when I meet him, he's like a pleasant person. Right. And then I do my assessment today, 10 years later, his risk assessment is going to be completely different. So we don't go in and start doing stables right off the bat, because there's nothing. I mean, if someone does a stable and they sit in prison for 10 years, like it's not even worth any one of our times, and it's going to expire. You have to do another stable every year.
So if a family member believes, or their loved one incarcerated believes they've never been assessed, can the family member just reach out to you, or can the inmate write to you and verify that they've had that static 99? Because there are a lot of people, I hear from a lot of people saying, well, I've never been assessed.
Yeah, because they're assuming that assessment means that someone calls them down. Like if you look at, like I said, if you look at these are static 99 areas. I don't have to call you down and do an interview with you to like find out how old you are.
Because it's your history.
Yeah. I don't have to like do an interview with you to find out whether or not you've ever been convicted of a violent crime. Like I can pull up all of so we have a guy who that's all he does is like when someone gets into the prison, he will like look at all of these ones. The only one that's maybe tougher is like I don't necessarily know from the history all the time whether you've been married and had a kind of successful marriage. It's one of the only ones that maybe we have to like reach out and like kind of find out about someone. But I would guess that the vast majority of our statics are correct, even when we check them, because we'll check them again on interview before they come in. So I do have, like, if I pulled up my tracker right now, I wouldn't, because it would just show too much of everyone's personal data out. But if I pulled up my tracker that has like 3,000 people on it, every single person on that tracker has a static 99 score.
Okay, so maybe it would be clarify then when you're going to do the full assessment to send to the board, like before a hearing, is that when they're closer to their original hearing, or because a lot of this depends on their sentence, whether it's a 1 to 5 versus a 5 to life, right?
Yeah. So you said a lot of things there, Molly. One of the things that we're trying to do is we are trying to get treatment earlier in the process. We used to have a goal, and it makes sense from a logical perspective. The worst case scenario is if we waste a bunch of resources, like doing treatment for a guy, and then just have him sit for 10 years and then just go backwards. And then we just have to treat him again later. It just doesn't make a lot of sense from a resource perspective. So for a long time, we would refuse to treat anyone until they were within 2 years of going to the board of pardons. And so that changed when the Board of Pardons went from their old way of doing hearings, and now they're doing smart scheduling. And smart scheduling means that you don't get multiple hearings with the Board of Pardons, you only get one. So because of that, like the Board of Pardons is scheduling someone's rehearing like immediately when they get into prison. So because of that, like it makes it so that we have a pretty good idea, like right off the bat, how long we have to work with somebody. I hope one of the problems is that if we wait to the very end to do treatment, then some people aren't eligible for releases if they can possibly get an early release. Even though I think early releases happen fewer than maybe everyone hopes they do. Because all the time I get families beating me up. They're like, well, we heard that there was an early release. But I was like, well, my wait list is 1,200 people. If I put you down, then someone else is like moving up. Like it's just not necessarily, I don't have all this space just to like move you ahead, just, hoping that the Board of Pardons will see you early. And the Board of Pardons have told me they're not really planning on seeing anybody early, that they've already kind of decided when they are kind of like going in that thing. But I am hoping that in the next like 2 years that we can get a cushion at the end where we can get treatment done and then people can get in, and then who knows, maybe the Board of Pardons decides they're going to start releasing people early, and then but right now they don't have an option because we're not missing any board dates right now, but we're not graduating people super early right now. Most people are getting graduated within a couple of weeks of going to the board, and the majority of the guys. So and which is how the system is designed. And I think everyone, on the justice side is pretty happy with that. But currently, and no one asked this question, but one of my biggest challenges is I get questions about the wait lists pretty consistently. One of the problems that we're having right now is the Board of Pardons has been scheduling people in a certain way. They've been giving people an original hearing, and then when they get to the original hearing, the board will see them and then give them 2 years or 3 years or whatever to complete therapy. That's how it's been for like 20, 25 years. And now that they're doing smart scheduling, they're not going to 2 hearings, they're going to 1 hearing. But what happened is the board scheduled everyone on top of each other. So like overnight, my wait list just doubled. I went from having a pretty manageable wait list to having just this humongous wait list. And it's just logistics because the smart scheduling changed. So what I predict is that I'm doing everything I can on the prison side. One of the things we're trying to do is I just brought on like 3 extra interns. We've just started a program in Gunnison. I just started a program in Beaver County Jail. So we've brought on, like, we've increased our bed capacity in the last year by like 80 beds or something. And we're just trying to get through this next 2 years of like the board changing. And so like, I'm nervous about it because we just, and when I asked the board about it, they said, they used this analogy, they called it the 2 bucket analogy. They said, we've been like taking out of this bucket and now we added another bucket and now we're adding both out of the same bucket. And so because of that, you might notice that our wait lists are, even though we've increased capacity tremendously, currently we only have 1 open treatment or 1 open therapist position, and it's in Gunnison, and I have a couple applicants and I'm hoping to hire someone next week. So if I hire someone next week, then I am completely full. I have like every therapist position is full. And we brought on, like I said, I brought on 3 extra interns and opened a county jail. So because of that, we're doing everything we can on our side. But I don't think in the next 2 years, I'm going to be able to get people done with treatment tremendously early. I'm hoping I can get everybody done by the time they go to the board, which is what we've been able to do so far. And we're hoping to be able to do that. So I don't know. So I don't know why I got off on that. I think you opened a can of worms for me, Molly. Those are hot button issues for me that I'm trying to work on. We're working feverishly trying to make that happen. I don't know if you have any follow-up questions or any other questions on that.
How about if we bounce to the questions about visiting, and then somebody asked to make sure you're still talking directly into your microphone because sometimes it cuts out.
Oh, okay. Well, my microphone's right in front of me. I don't know. Maybe I talk so loud I scare the microphone. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Okay, so I've got a couple of slides about visiting policy and procedure. So this is another super hot button issue. So we have visiting policy. So here's the questions that I was asked prior to this by you guys. What are the new policies for visiting for inmates with sex offender charges? There are no new policies. The policies were written like 2 or 3 years ago. There's no new ones. I was meeting with several. I was meeting with several captains and meeting with one of the deputy wardens about maybe changing visiting policies, and that's been put on hold. So we certainly don't have any changes for visiting, although we have had, we've been doing some things that are a little bit different, but we had an incident. There was an incident where there were some visiting rules that we just kind of like, it wasn't any of our guys. It wasn't a guy with a sex offense history. It was a different guy. But a visit went really bad and some really disgusting things happened during the visit. And so because of that, UDC has recently, as in like a month ago, taken a pretty big step back and kind of reevaluated and wanted to make sure that the visiting is maybe safer than it was. And so there was some personnel that was moved around. One of the people that was over visiting got moved and someone else got moved back. And they were told specifically to try to make sure that no incidents happen. So because of that, I think it does temporarily affect visiting. I think that we're probably going to see more letter of the law decisions about visiting. So, for instance, in the last year or I've only been here like 8 months. So in the last 8 months, I've been getting, about a dozen emails a week asking for like visiting requests. And as of right now, the last 3 weeks, I've gotten none, which just means that officers are just denying them and not asking me my advice on them. So I don't know when it's going to be till we but like, I'll show you, like, if you read the UDC policy, it's pretty restrictive. So this is like our flow chart about it. This is straight off of the policy. So for one, is this person convicted of a sex offense? If no, we're not involved at all with SOTP. If they are convicted of a sex offense, are they convicted of a sex offense against a child? If no, they can have the same visitation privileges as other offenders. So really, our restrictive visitation policy only applies to people with sex offenses against children. So just because you have a sex offense doesn't mean that any of these kind of apply. So if yes, there is so the policy, there was a question that asked, well, when do we decide about barrier visits versus contact visits? So the current UDC policy says that there is no option for contact visits. Some have happened and they've been like, some exceptions have been made. But if you read the policy, it says that if you have a sex crime against a child, you are not allowed to have contact visits while you're in prison. That's the policy. So our policy allows us to have limited barrier or video visits with minors of the immediate family. This would be biological children. This is adopted children, stepchildren, siblings, and things like that. But like I was meeting with a lot of the women, and they were saying, "Well, my niece is someone that's really important to me, but the policy doesn't currently allow you to have barrier visits or video visits with nieces." And you might say, any of those types of things. That's the current thing. So we were looking at changing it, and I don't know. I'm still pushing it. I thought we were pretty close to making some changes, and then there was a little bit of a shakeup because some people couldn't follow the policy. And so anyway, so does the requested minor align with the victim profile? So we do look at the victim profile, and if no, then we can move forward and say, is the requested minor the sibling of the victim? That's another thing that we kind of tend to look at. So we do ask ourselves when we're making recommendations, is this visit? So for instance, if there were like 5 kids and one of them was a victim, we sometimes deny visits to the entire group because we're concerned about what those visits would do to the victim. And so sometimes we have to look at those types of things when we're looking at it. So so those are, I didn't want to talk about visits because our policy is pretty restrictive. We've been trying to find ways to make it less restrictive over time. And I think we've taken a step back. I don't know if anyone has any questions about it, but certainly, okay, so just so you know, just a clarification. SOTP, I do not have authority to approve any visits. All visits are approved by the visiting team, which are officers. The only thing that we do is make recommendations. So if an officer wants to allow a visit, they're supposed to check with us so that we can do some legwork, so that we can decide whether or not this would be a good idea or a bad idea, whether this person's in a good place or not. And they want to check some of those types of things in order for that to happen. So anyway, that's the policy. One of the complications is there are so many different places in UDC. There's like, county jails, there's all these different places, and sometimes officers just don't check. And so it's possible that people have like video visits on tablets with minors all the time, the whole time that they're incarcerated. And then so one of the questions that I got was, do inmates who are allowed to have visits with family members while in population have those visits taken away when they're enrolled in the SOTP program? So that used to happen, but it didn't happen the way people think it is. It used to only happen because we assumed that they were never having visits. And then by the time what the policy says, if you read the UDC policy, is they can only have visits once they get to treatment and once they get assigned a therapist, and then we can like evaluate it and give visits. So we assumed that if you were in prison for 10 years, you weren't having any contact with children. And then you got to us, and then we could be like, all right, now we can give you contact with children. But what ended up happening was people would go to a county jail, no one would ever check, and they would just violate UDC policy, and they were allowing all sorts of visits. And then they would come to us, and because we are like aware of the policy and aware, then we would say like, okay, until you get into therapy, we're not going to allow these visits. And people would be like, well, I've always had visits. And so we've actually recently changed our policies because that was like really disruptive for a lot of people. Visits are different than phone calls. It used to be that we weren't allowing any phone calls, and now we've decided that we just can't police phone calls, and other places are not policing phone calls. And so unless we like have a reason to believe that something like sinister is happening, then we're not really regulating phone calls. So it's possible for someone to have phone calls with their children. Now it's a pretty big deal if you have phone calls with victims. Like that's a reason why we would like maybe take someone out of treatment or something like that, or if that's kind of happening. So we have adjusted our policies for SOTP simply because if you're like in some random county jail, they're just not like looking at this stuff. They just don't care. And so it's possible for people to say, well, I had so many visits in those places. And what that tells me is not that that's the policy. What they're telling me is the policy is just not being enforced well. And so, but what I'm telling you right now is we took a step back, and I'm kind of taken out of the loop right now. And so, and in Gunnison, I get very few visiting requests either. Like the officers down there are kind of making the decisions and not really talking to us. And so that's one of my goals, is like to kind of become friendly again with all of the visiting people, to say like, hey, how come we're not being talked to about this? Like, because what I'm assuming is that in the last month, there's been a lot more visiting denials than were happening recently. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or concerns about that.
I think you answered a lot of questions, and visiting is topsy-turvy right now anyway, because they're writing the regular visiting policy, or rewriting the regular visiting policy. So thank you for enlightening us on how it now works and what the actual policy for people with sex offenses is.
Yeah.
Have you met with the new lieutenants over visiting that
So
he took over?
I had an email back and forth. I was actually really close to the old lieutenants, and we had, probably once a month meetings. And, I don't know if it's that I haven't, that I need to make myself more available. I don't know, maybe I need to like buy him a burrito or something and go over. I got to do something. I got to get involved there, because I've emailed and introduced myself. They've emailed back. But like I said, my opinion is they were transferred over saying, hey, don't let crap happen anymore. And I've gotten 0 requests in like 3 weeks. And so it's probably like 30 requests fewer than would have happened under the old administration.
That could be them, but it also could just be families are worried about like what clothing we're wearing. Therefore, asking somebody about something as big as this is probably families are trying to get a feel for how things are going to go anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Molly. I'm gonna put it in my notes, and I'm gonna go have a face to face because I'm just gonna assume the best. I'm gonna assume these are good people trying to do their job, and I'm gonna go build a relationship with them, and then I'll report back kind of what they're saying. Because maybe it's just as simple as like once they know me and once we start collaborating, then we'll be able to do amazing work with visiting.
And you know what, Jared, don't take it personally because they are really overwhelmed. Because as you know, UDC does not, it has one spot for one person that's leaving for another person to come into. And so they don't train them for 2 months in visiting before they took over. And then they were told they had to completely revamp it all. So I know they're overwhelmed. I've talked to both of them. So don't take it personally, but I'll be happy to drop a little bug in their ear about, you might want to talk about
Yeah.
to Jared Hill about the SO visits.
Yeah, and I haven't had a lot of success with Gunnison, and maybe it's just that I haven't like I work in the same building as the lieutenants over visiting, and so I just saw them a lot, and I just don't really run into the people over visiting in Gunnison, and so maybe that's been my bad that I've had other things on my mind. And I'm going to be there tomorrow. Maybe I'll stop by and just start finding out who the visiting people are down there and just find out why I'm not getting included in that. So, okay.
Thank you.
Well, that is all of the stuff I prepared. So I don't know if there are time for other questions. It looks like we really only have 15 minutes left. So you feel free to kick me out at any point in time or ask.
There's a big chat list going on there, and I wonder if maybe if you're able to bring up your chat, if you might be able to look at it and maybe spot answer different things that you haven't covered already.
Oh man, it has 73 things. How am I going
to? Well, I think Molly was covering most of them, at least for the first half, and a lot of them. But just in the last 10 minutes or so, there is kind of a flood of comments here.
Okay, let's see.
While you're looking, I'm going to ask people to read the chat on what Andrew Nichols wrote at 8:12 p.m. He's giving a success story of his post-incarceration and telling your loved ones that they can make it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel anyway. And Jared, you were his counselor.
You're not supposed to out him like, oh, did he say that?
He wrote it in here, or I wouldn't know about anything. He outed himself.
I didn't even want to allude that I had a relationship with Andrew. I have a ton of respect for this man, and we work together really well, but I got to pretend I don't know him in public, or they're like, how do you know that guy?
Well,
Jared's a wonderful guy. Thank you so much. I appreciate watching you and talking with you in the SOMAC meetings, and Mark Moffat was my attorney pre-prison, and so I enjoyed hearing him talk too. So.
Okay, I got a couple questions here I can answer. So Felix says, when is UDC going to go through training on Static 99, and when would it be implemented in assessments? So all of the prison therapists are already using the Static 99. The people that aren't is APNP and the PSI writers. We are training a 4-person team in 2 weeks. I have another training on Thursday. I'm in the middle of training on it. And so we'll be completed well, then I have to take a huge test. I have to take a 4-hour test for this. But provided that we all pass it, then we should have 4 trainers, and then we're just going to start setting up like kind of immediately. Like I just think we're going to start inviting like some community treatment people in, because my vision would be that I could write a risk assessment and I could send it out to the community and everyone could read it perfectly, and we could just have this like beautiful continuum of care. Or let's say, God forbid, someone has a parole violation, the therapist can write a report and send it to me, and it's all intelligible, and we could all use the same and talk the same language. And so I think that would be really good. So okay, so that's the answer to that question. So okay,
there's some about the risk-based registry.
Yeah. Okay, so what's that? I'm seeing a question from Allison right next, so I'll answer that real quick, and then you can ask me the risk-based registry. So Allison says, I've heard a lot about outside of prison SOTP therapy. How do they decide which inmates are eligible, and how does that affect their release date? Okay, I don't know what you're saying, Allison. I have heard a lot about outside of prison. Oh, I don't know. Can you clarify that for me? I don't know exactly what you're asking me.
Allison, I can unmute you if you're open to speaking. You're
Hey,
unmuted.
Jared,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Okay. So basically our loved one is saying that he is hearing that some people that are low risk are eligible to do therapy on the outside, but he didn't know. Like, he also had an understanding too that he would get information about his treatment whenever he sees the board in August of 26. And I'm kind of hearing that on this meeting, it's saying that treatment might happen before he sees the board.
Yeah. So
we're kind of confused on that. And then, like, could he qualify for outside treatment? I mean, how does all that work?
yeah. So the idea is that, like I said before, the research says that people that are well below average risk, we're just wasting their time doing treatment with them in prison. That it's probably better served for an outside. We probably don't even need to do very much therapy with them. So that was the stance for SOTP for the last 2 years or 3 years. It's not popular. Like, if you're not a therapist and you don't believe in research, nobody likes that. And so the Board of Pardons just made it very clear that they were not going to. So what happened is we did that for a while, and a couple of guys did get released, but just as many, like, the when they went to the board, instead of releasing them, the board was putting like a new expectation and just giving them another rehearing and putting them into it. So that's the gamble that we take if we do that approach. And the board has asked me not to do that. And so we had, probably in February and March of this year, we had 6 guys go to the board and got extended rehearings, even though we asked the board to release them without treatment. And I just decided that that's sort of intolerable. So what I would guess, without knowing anything about your son, I would guess if you would email me and we had a private conversation, I could probably tell you exactly where he is and what's going on. What would happen is we already have a pretty good idea of what his risk looks like. We already kind of have him slated for treatment. We already kind of know. We have so I can tell on your guys' end, you don't have this information, and I'm sure it's really stressful. But we have a tracker that we follow all this stuff. I'm 99% sure that we know exactly where he is and have a pretty good idea of where we're putting him in, and kind of what is happening with risk and what we're doing. So if he has a 2026 rehearing, we probably either have him on a list for treatment that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks or couple of months, or we're pretty close to it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think Andrew basically answered the question about risk-based registries and SOMAC. And I think there was another question about it that Albert asked, but I think, educating our lawmakers, and that's up to individual families to reach out to their lawmakers, their legislators, and educate them on whatever issues you're interested in regarding prison and the criminal justice system. Like Jared said earlier, there's a perception, and he just blew some of the public perceptions out of the water with this presentation, but that's why we're offering it, so you guys know.
Yeah, we have Martel talked about this issue. In fact, SOMAC, I don't know if Andrew said this or not, but SOMAC almost got defunded over this issue. It is incredibly unpopular with our current legislature to have risk-based registry. And I think the reason is because people just distrust risk assessment in general. And that number that I told you before, that space between being identified for sex crimes and committing a sex crime, they're just, and also, like, there's really no research that the registry even works, that it even really does a lot. And so I don't personally I think if no one was on the registry, we probably wouldn't see a very big increase in sexual reoffending. But I think for me, the risk-based registry is just such an awesome idea, guys, that, what I would love to do is have someone stay on the registry until they demonstrated low risk. and then they can like work their way off. As soon as you showed me that you can handle all this stuff and that you can go a certain number of time, then once your risk gets below this certain way, why are we tracking you anymore? But it is unpopular, and I doubt you will see it being raised in the next year or two, because I think SOMAC doesn't want to get defunded, and that's sort of what they told us. They told us that they would defund it if we brought it up again.
Exactly. And Faye Jenkins, who we met at the first, she has been advocating for a risk-based registry for many, many years through a lot of different chair people of this sex offense task force. I think a lot of her efforts were why SOMAC was actually developed in the first place. And so this is not something that happens overnight.
Yeah. So the idea of the risk-based registry is not dead. I feel like SOMAC try to bite off too much at once. And I kind of put that out there in the meeting, like you got to approach this slow and careful. And I'm like, oh no, let's just go all out. And I think that did intimidate the legislator a little bit more than they were ready for. So their no focus is education. They want to get out a website. They want to get data available to the public, so the public can read it, come to their own decision. They want to focus on how to help people who have not been caught yet, who might be in a risky situation of committing a crime, and it needs help. And so it's like maybe make it a little bit easier for them to get some of these therapists before they commit their crime versus then after. They wanted to look at, maybe some of the definitions in the registry and how to make it a little bit more clear of what the restrictions are when it comes to restricted areas and parental responsibilities. And I hope that doesn't bite us in the end, making it more restrictive. So they're still actively working and where they can, and with the long goal of a risk-based registry, because we know we're putting too many resources into people who don't need that level of supervision, which distracts from people who do need that type of supervision and awareness in the community. And so, yeah, it's a long haul, but little by little.
We're building bridges too, and Faye's been a big part of that. We've been building bridges. Like I was invited to go speak to one of the largest victim advocacy groups in the state in September. And I'm going to be getting the opposite side of this, like I'm getting all of these questions. Like one of the questions here, like, why is there even a wait list? And the question I'm going to get is, why do you even want to release these guys? And so it's just, I don't know. We need to build, right? I think for a long time, we haven't had these discussions, and now we're having these discussions in Utah for the first time ever. And I think that, so thank you, Faye, for answering that. I thought that was a really good answer. I wanted to answer one of these things too, because I think I get questions like this from families all the time, like how come we can't get people in earlier, and what can we sort of do? And I really wish that some of you got the lovely opportunity to sit in front of a 1,200 person wait list and try to make all of this stuff work. You get, right now we have, it's really a difficult thing. And one of the things, for instance, I have probably a 250 person list that's it's what we call our natural life list. It's the life without the possibility of parole. And so I have those guys, and are we going to put them into therapy, or are we not going to put them into therapy? I have some people that have they have to do 3 back-to-back 15 years to life. And if I have a guy that has 3 back-to-back 15 years to life, I could put him into therapy right off the bat. And then what? He has to sit for 45 years. And then so when am I going to put him in? It doesn't make any sense to put him in the year he gets into therapy. He's going to be a completely different person in 45 years. And so we have a lot of these different things that are kind of happening. And so the wait list is incredibly complicated. All I know right now is over the last couple of years, we haven't we're getting almost everybody in before they get released. There was a time when we weren't doing a very good job of managing the list, and people were in prison for longer than they had to be because we couldn't get them through therapy in time. And I am, I'm worried, like I have nightmares at night that, this wait list is going to be unmanageable and I'm going to get to that like next year. But certainly it hasn't happened in the last 2 years. We've been able to get people through and we've been able to do it. And so anyway, so it is more complicated than like, why is there a wait list at all? Well, because therapy takes a year and I have, I've got 6 therapists in Green. I have the potential for 3 in Gunnison, and I've got 3 county jails, and that's to treat 1,500 people. And that's kind of what it is. And if you guys want, you could help by convincing the legislature to like divest funds. I could possibly use 4 more therapists today and I could get them all busy and I could do it. But the legislature has not been, and partly it was our fault, right? Like partly it was our fault. We didn't do a good job back before 2017. We had an audit, we got in trouble, and the audit recommended not giving us any extra money. So because of that, they basically said, here are like 1,000 things to change. And up to this point, I believe we've changed almost all of them. And so frankly, I'm going to ask for another audit. I mean, maybe a year. Give me a year to like make sure that we like dot our I's and cross our T's. But I'm going to ask for another audit. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get more money unless I do that because it comes right from the legislature. It's not like UDC doesn't have extra money just to give us therapists. And so it has to come from there. And currently, it is just not popular to put money into sex offenders. It's just like we have to scrape for every, like, just so you know, we have 1/3 of the population, but substance use, they have like 7 times the resources. And because they, they did, I don't know, they passed their audit, they looked better than we did. And the legislature gave them some money and they added a bunch of extra stuff. So part of it was our fault from like a decade ago. So that's why I have plans. I've been bringing on interns has been something, adding in county jails. But I think my longest goal is I'm going to ask the legislature to send another audit down. And, probably in a year, I'm going to ask that. And then hopefully we come out looking a lot better. I'm convinced we're going to look better than we did, but I'm hoping we look really good. And then they're going to give us, hopefully give us some extra therapists. And then when someone says like, why the wait list? I'll be like, well, we actually don't really have one, but we're a couple of years from that. So anyway, we are right at the end of time. So I am sorry. I hope that you learned something.
Thank you so much for coming, Jared. I think on behalf of all of the families, I really appreciate your explaining this to us because it's it's not simple, it's complicated. So can I just have 1 minute to remind everybody on this meeting that there are 5 candidates for the new Board of Pardons member. They're on our family Facebook group. Do your research. You can email if you want our suggestions, but you've got 1 defense attorney, 1 prosecutor, another AP&P supervisor, Brett Varose, who has been with the board for 10 years, knows everything about how the board works, has been a hearing officer, and won't have a year's worth of a learning curve to be a member. So anyway, thank you, and go to our website and have your voices heard for the board. Thank you.
And with that, 1 quick plug for our next meeting will be held on Monday, September 8th. We're excited to have Tyler Hansen. He's the Chief Marketing Officer of Steps Recovery Center. He'll be covering healing through recovery. And so it'll be the same time, same channel. We hope that you'll join us on September 8th, and we'd hope to see you all there. Jared, thanks again so much for all this information. We really appreciate you, and thank you for everybody for being here tonight. Be safe out there. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.